like it.
Afternoon, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I can see some of you flooding in the virtual world. We'll just give a few more minutes for flurry to stop. I don't know. I'm just going to mute everybody to start, if that's all right. Okay, some people still coming in. Oh, someone has raised their hand. I don't know if you've got a technical question, you can put it into the chat, perhaps. Okay. All good. Okay, well, afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on policy, practice and action for food growing, and with a particular focus on working with local authorities. This has been organised by two of the projects at Sustain, so Sustainable Food Places, which is a partnership across Sustain, Soil Association and Food Matters, and also our Fringe Farming work, which has a number of partners, some of who are represented today, and I'm not going to list them all right now. But thank you and welcome to today's webinar. We are recording, so if you should have been asked for permission for that, but most of you won't be seen by the recording anyway. I'm Sarah Williams, so I'm the Programmes Director here at Sustain and have been personally championing peri-urban farming for probably about the last 13 years, which is the time that I've been at Sustain, initially joining as part of the Capital Growth team. And the reason that I've been championing them is because I was just so impressed at the handful that I got to see, and really ever since I've been trying to see how we can unlock land for more peri-urban growing. And that's why I was delighted when a couple of years ago we managed to actually turn this sort of vision into a bit of a campaign and project to see how much further we could get. I'm also delighted that so many of you have shown an interest and coming along to this webinar today. So we had there's about 160 of you joined, and we know that there's many more that will receive the recording. We had about 400 people register. So I think that just shows that peri-urban farming, or fringe farming as we refer to it, is a idea that really has come of age and something that feels like it's needed now more than ever. So we've got some fantastic speakers lined up for you today. We've got a couple of presentations, but also quite a discursive approach to this topic. So we really want to dive into some discussion. So quite a big panel. So I've got my work cut out to manage it. So hopefully I'll do that okay. Just a reminder that anything chat-based, put in the chat. Do please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're coming from. I'm sitting in a very snowy East London, so I'm sure many of you are equally surrounded with the white fluffy stuff that we don't get very much. So do introduce yourself into the chat, tell us where you're coming from, and if you have any questions, then please put them in the Q&A part of the webinar today, so that we can keep hold of those really pertinent questions. Some questions came in advance, so we have got a set of questions that we're ready to ask. Everyone's saying hi, so that's fantastic. We want you to feel like you're all here together, even though you can't see one another, so that's really good. Anything technical, we've got Maya on hand, who's dealing with any tech issues, so please direct those to her in the chat, and that would be great. So for those of you that aren't aware of Sustain, we're an alliance of food and farming organisations, around 100 working nationally, but also many more locally based organisations through our many networks, and none more important than our Sustainable Food Places network, which has well over 50, I don't know what the number is now, I think it's more like 70 odd members across the UK, really working to show collectively the power of collaborative action and to push for national policies that will make our communities thrive. And I think we were really keen to sort of share some of the learning that's been coming across in our fringe farming projects to the wider Sustainable Food Places network, because there are real opportunities to make a difference at a local level. So really looking forward to hearing from some of those local places on what's made a difference, but also to think a bit more about what national policies we still need to really create access to land at a local level. So we're going to hear from fringe farming partners, the councillors, council officers, to really to see what those opportunities are. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Ario, who is our peri-urban farming project officer working at Sustain. So this project is really about connecting the movement for agroecological food production on the fringes of our cities, and has been working with partners in Bristol, London, Cardiff, Sheffield and Glasgow to see how we can do that and how we can sort of bring that vision to reality. So we've been really trying to get to grips with some of those barriers and those opportunities for accessing land, and seeing what opportunity there is to change policy and developing some realistic policy recommendations to help us get that real thriving network of market gardens on the edge of our cities. So over to you, Ario. I think you're going to be sharing some slides, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be part of this webinar and see what comes out of it in our discussions. Let's just try and share this. So hopefully you can see my slides. So yeah, as Sarah said, it's very much a partner project, a collaborative project, and I'll just go through the partners that we have by name, just so you know. So we have Regather from Sheffield, Food Sense Wales from Cardiff, who are here today, and they'll be presenting as well and being part of the panel. We have Shared Assets, who also are here, and they're one of our national partners. And then we have Capital Growth, who are our London partner, Bristol Food Producers, obviously from Bristol, Land Workers Alliance, another national partner, and Glasgow Community Food Network, who, yeah, obviously are from Glasgow, and the picture is of Abby from GCFN. So, yeah, I thought it would be a good idea just to kind of showcase agroecology and why we champion agroecology, and kind of its relation to local food, which is kind of what we're talking about today. So I won't go into detail about what agroecology is as a type of farming that's good for people on the planet, but more just to outline relevant characteristics of it. So one characteristic that tends to happen is agroecological food systems tend to be shorter in terms of the kind of food miles, but also in terms of how close consumers are to producers. And that can come up with all sorts of benefits, such as community supported agriculture. Another side effect of having more kind of emphasis on local food systems, these systems tend to be decentralized, so kind of moving away from the dominant model of you know, where we currently kind of have large supermarkets kind of dictating food prices, and farmers kind of having to bow down to them in order to survive. And speaking of which, there's a really good report that I should kind of highlight that's come out saying unpicking food prices. So hopefully you can get a link to that. And it kind of talks about how supermarket dominance undercuts farmer livelihoods, but also just income. And then another aspect of agroecological food systems, because they are more localized and decentralized, you kind of get more diverse food systems, or at least different ways of farming and different ways of purchasing food and different ways of consuming food ultimately. So I think this is important to highlight. And another feature of agroecological food systems which we champion are that they tend to operate using collective structures, so different actors on the value chain working together, and this makes for more horizontal decision making, kind of evening out the power dynamics where people are working more collaboratively rather than hierarchically. And I think an important aspect of that is farmers ultimately can get better prices for their produce and kind of demand better working conditions and more able to work towards other public goods, such as encouraging biodiversity and building community support, which I think we'll talk about as well. So just to give a kind of very brief outline of what the Fringe Farming project is. So as Sarah says, we're very much concerned about the peri-urban area of UK. And so we see this as a place of potential. It's kind of a mix between urban and rural. It's near enough to markets, but also is rural enough to have larger spaces in which to farm, so larger scale farming rather than urban farming per se. And so, yeah, I think this kind of dynamic mix of urban and rural is really exciting, but at the same time, it's also a place of tension, especially when you talk about competition with housing and so on. And a big aspect of, we were mainly kind of supporting or suggesting that horticultural production is most suitable for peri-urban farming, just because the fruit and vegetable is more likely to fetch a better return in terms of investment, but also it just makes more sense in terms of kind of perishable shelf life of fruit and veg and getting them to market quicker. And then, yeah, as I mentioned, we're supporting local food infrastructure, and that's very much working with our 5 local partners. So this is a very, very kind of brief headlines of what's happened in the last 2 years. Definitely doesn't encapsulate or do justice to what we've achieved in such little time. But just to go through it, so in the first year, each city, each local partner put on a series of meetings to form action plans. And then, so these were kind of plans in which to engage with policy, to engage with practice, and in kind of supporting the kind of farming we wanted.
Harry, just to let you know, we've got about 30 seconds, 1 minute.
30 seconds, okay, I'll rush really quickly through this. So, and year 2 was really engaging in these action plans. Year 3 is very much a question mark, because we're awaiting possible funding, but there are a few things that we'd like to do. I don't have time to go through it now. So I'll skip through this, but just to say, so what the kind of asks we're lobbying for. So land is a huge issue. As I mentioned, there's competition with housing and land speculation. So that's definitely something we're highlighting. But at the same time, what we want is to deliver kind of more holistic, integrated package for farmers. So land is not enough if you don't have access to markets, for example, or if you don't have farmers to farm the land. So it's really delivering an integrated package, kind of setting people up to succeed. So that's part of our policy asks. And if you are interested in looking at these kind of recommendations in more detail, there's a few links here. I think that we put in the chat as well. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you to go through this. And it kind of forms the basis of what we're talking about today.
Thanks, Javier. Sorry to speed you up, but I'm sure there'll be more opportunities to come back to what we're doing in the question and answers. And as you say, this whole session today is framed around some of the work that we have been doing. So I'm going to move us on so that we don't get too far behind, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Pam. Pam, I've got your biog here. I feel like it would take me like, the next 5 minutes to go through it. It's amazing. But for those of you that haven't had the privilege of hanging out with Pam, Pam were her CBE, of course, and has been an activist and advisor for over, I'm not going to say how many years, I'm just going to say many years. And so ranging from leader of local authority to board members of several environmental bodies. And many of you may know and have probably heard of the Incredible Edible movement that Pam chairs and co-founded, which is really about demonstrating and encouraging community empowerment through the lens of local food. It was a bit opportunistic, really. We really wanted to get Pam along to talk about her latest campaign, which is the Right to Grow campaign, and how it could really sort of help turn the tide on one of the biggest barriers that we've seen during the Fringe Farming project, which is access to land. So without further ado, Pam, I'm going to hand over to you. I will give you a 1 minute warning as well. And I think someone else is sharing your slides for you. Is that right? They've appeared, so that must be the case. So if you want to unmute, and over to you, Pam.
Brilliant. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's going to be a bit subliminal, flash, 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 flash. But I hope some of you know a little bit about Incredible Edible, so I'm not going to bore you to death about the history, but I am going to try and make a link between 15 years ago when we kicked off with Incredible Edible and our ask for today, which is a community right to grow on public realm. Could I go to the next slide, please? So and the next one, I think, which is about the leadership. Yeah. So just to remind us, back. It's going to be fun, this. Back. No, not forward. So I tell you, perfect. Thank you so much. Just to remind us, this is about people power. This is about not hanging around for other people to allow us to nurture ourselves, feed ourselves, look after our communities and have decent lives for all the reasons that you can see on the screen. And that's why Incredible Edible was kicked off 15 years ago, because there's great people working in local authorities and anchors, but there's far too much top down happening. And there's far too many opportunities to say no, because there seems to be other pressures. But now, 15 years on, when we can see those things that we had talked about in the Rio Earth Summit coming to fruition, it's about time we stepped up a gear and did something. And there is so much synergy between what we're talking about, which is a new piece of legislation, and what Ario's been talking about, which is fringe farming, because it all relies on land that people have access to nurture their communities, create new jobs, learn new skills and reconnect with people. Let's whiz through all the Incredible Edible stuff and go straight to the crux of the matter. So next slide, please. Simple plate, planting your communities, share your art, the skills that you've got, planting, cooking, grafting trees, whatever, and use any money you've got in your pocket to support a local business. That, through living your life a different way, is sustainable development. But you've never even talked about sustainable development, and you've not even mentioned climate change. So that is what Incredible Edible is all about. But there was a big problem, because it works really well when you've got great local authorities, and it doesn't work as well when you've got local authorities that, for whatever reason, not because they're bad people, tend to say no to, can I grow here? Or is it okay if I set up a stall there? Or whatever else it might be. And quite frankly, as we kind of like come to the precipice of climate change, we have not got any time for that waiting for permission stuff to happen. So we need to change the rules. And this is all about changing the rules. So let's skip lots of slides and go. So skip, 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 skip. We're going to skip. You can see any of these. I will send them to you. Let's stop there a minute and bore you to death on it. But just for now, we need to get access to the land that is funded through the public purse. That is our public realm. That is our verges. That is our external sort of round bits of parks or recreational areas or whatever it is. We need the community to have the right to own it, the right to use it. And we need to design our towns and cities so that this happens in the middle as well as on the edge. Next, please. So we launched a right to grow. We've got a piece of legislation that is ready, produced by barristers. It could go into an act of parliament if politicians had the will of it tomorrow. It could be levelled up. It could be rights. That could be all manner of things around health and well-being. And basically it says, if we have land near to where we live, that is the public land, which is land that is funded through our purse, we, the people, have got a right to say to the local authority, to the health authority, to defence estates or anybody else, this is our land, actually. We'd like to have a conversation with you about growing food, nurturing our communities and expanding the possibilities of local business on that land. Not may we, but we've got a right. We're not asking about ownership at this stage. We can talk about ownership at a future point with development trusts or community land trusts. All these things are possible because we're all on the same road together. But for now, we're saying, let's change that dynamic between poor little community and a state that's overstretched, so therefore has a default position of saying no, and let's give us a right to say, we've identified some land close to us. You tell us why we can't do it as opposed to why we can. This is something that seems to fit in with so many of people's ideas today around health and well-being, physical activity, community development, reconnecting our communities, loneliness, you name it. Getting more people being able to walk out of their front door and grow locally has got to be the right way forward. And what we know from the academics that are behind this is that, just as Ario was saying, we could theoretically produce 40% of our UK fruit and veg from our public realm. And even if that was just a quarter, not 40%, imagine what that would mean in terms of all the supply chains. So basically, we've got a campaign. If you look at incredibleedible.org.uk, you can go on that right to grow page. You can have a look at the legislation. You can have a look at the motion to council. You can have a look at the motion to mayoralities. And basically, this is a call to arms, really. if I might say so, because we have not got the time for faff around anymore. And there are so many people in the grassroots who know what good looks like. And I'm just hoping that we can connect ourselves together and push that dial and force people into seeing that actually the future could be great if we all just shared the possibility of creating a kind of prosperity. That's
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Pam. Are you all right if I come in with a quick couple of questions just to sort of help? And these are sort of semi-based on some of the questions that came in from people attending. I mean, my first question, I suppose, is what we're really interested in from the sort of fringe farming, peri-urban farming perspective, I suppose, is growing at scale and being able to grow productively in a way that can feed our cities. So do you think that the right to grow can also support people that are looking to sort of grow at scale?
Without a shadow of a doubt. Right, this is a turnkey piece of legislation because we've got loads of public realm that people collectively could start to create community farms, could start to create social enterprises, all by repurposing our public realm. Completely on the same page. It's very exciting. And I think that if we could just get this over the line, and I think we can get it over the line in the next 2 or 3 years, imagine what we could do in terms of your agenda on the peri-urban fringe.
Yeah, and I mean, someone very sort of appropriately framed a question that said, do you agree that the issue of permission by public landowners and timely and proportionate processes is the most important step in gaining access to public land?
I think what we need is a right. You know, I came into this world of Incredible Edible 15 years ago by saying, let's not ask for permission. You know, let's just go and do it. And then, but now, wouldn't it be great for those people that aren't confident enough to go and say, do you mind, to actually know when they wake up in the morning, they've got a right? Yeah. We could bring forward a whole generation of people that are a little bit concerned at the moment about whether they actually have got the skill sets to talk to local authorities or elsewhere. Give them this right, and suddenly we start to see that generational shift.
Well, I know for one, from myself and from colleagues that I've worked alongside, it would definitely save us a lot of time, because I'm sure all of us have spent a huge amount of time chasing our tails on where to go, who to ask, asking the right way, asking nicely. And so I think it is really exciting to actually change the narrative here and just to really frame this as a different ask. So that's why we're really excited about it. I think we've been those of us been working in sort of food growing sector have been looking for the sort of call to arms at a national policy level for a while. So I'm really excited that we can all get behind you. And I can see someone's put in the chat here that they've recently got Shropshire to agree a right to grow. So it's getting traction locally. So I suppose, yeah, what do you want us to do next, Pam?
What I would absolutely do, first of all, if you know that there are great, right. One, I am not knocking local authorities. I love them. They have been under the cosh. This is not about doing people down. This is about saying, let's share the great practice. So tell me when people have given you a right to grow. Let's actually celebrate that. Let's put that out there. Let these people be the champions that will give the other anchor institutions confidence. That's the first thing. Let's identify how and where we can work collectively. And I have always thought the best way to change people's minds is to demonstrate what good looks like. So together, let's find some places where we can actually hit the ground running and say, let's not be frightened about this. Look at what it means for everybody's benefit. So that's what I'd like. And I'm hoping that next year we can start to have some pretty exciting public flash mob events where we can demonstrate that we can green up a place with fabulous edible food and make it so much better. And that it would be, the next stage to that would be to just say, yeah, you've got a right to do that. So get in contact with me with any great suggestions and any great anchors and any stars in the food growing movement, and I'd love to celebrate them.
Wonderful, that's fantastic. And obviously do carry on chatting with Pam. I think you're going to stick around for a bit in the chat. Okay, I know we're a bit behind Bella, but we will catch up. So I'm now going to hand over to Bella, who's just going to do a little Mentimeter poll with us, because we just wanted to get a bit of a sense of our audience while you're here today and what matters to you. So over to you, Bella.
Hi everyone. Yeah, sorry, we keep teasing you with the idea of a panel discussion and we're just holding it off for 1 second longer just to do this Menti. Check you're all here and find a little bit about you as well. So I'm just going to share my screen, and in the chat my colleague Maya is sharing a link that you can either click on to follow, or otherwise if you go to menti.com, which is menti.com, then you can type in the code 6354739, which is at the top of the screen now. And we'd just love to hear from some of you about which sector you work in, so we can see who's come along today, who's listening in. It'd be great to see what that spread is. I'll just let that come in for a little bit longer, and then we've got one other really quick question for you as well that I'll share in a second. Okay, interesting to see. Lots from the third sector, but a really good amount coming from local authorities as well. Really nice to have you all here. Some growers as well. That's absolutely great. And everyone else too. Brilliant to have you here. Still coming in. We've had 74 responses. I'll give you 10 seconds more so that you get a chance. I know there's 200 of us in today, so brilliant. Okay, it's slowing down. So third sector is definitely leading the way, but we've got a really nice spread of people from other areas as well. So really, really brilliant to have you all here. Thanks for coming along. I'm just going to click onto the next question now, which is, why is it important to be farming at the fringes of our towns and cities? Great to see some of you already been putting the answers in. So yeah, any words that come to mind for you on this? Be great to see. A really nice spread, actually. I think there's obviously a bit of crossover. We've got social, we've got connection, we've got community, health and well-being coming up really high as well. Resilience, biodiversity, environment, sustainability, and community really strong in the middle there. Food security feels really relevant at the moment too, of course. This is brilliant. I don't want to cut it off too quickly, but we can share it again at the end, maybe. Keep those coming in.
That'd be great.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Okay. So for our first panel discussion, I'm going to introduce two of our panelists initially. So we have Pearl Costello from Food Sense Wales, who's working collectively with her colleagues on creating a food system for Wales that's good for people and planet, as many of us are. And she's also the lead for Food Cardiff. And she's responsible. Pearl has been working with us on our Bridging the Gap programme, so it's also great to have her here today on that, but has been working together many of the sustainable food projects in Cardiff and to share best practice across that network. We also have Mark Walton, another great colleague on many programmes. Mark's the founder and director of Shared Assets, who describes himself as a think and do tank, working to create a socially just future through practical projects that build new relationships between people and the land. So he's involved in quite a range of projects that are seeking to increase opportunities for communities and new entrant farmers to get their hands on that land and create new opportunities for peri-urban farming. So welcome today. Thank you for joining the panel. First of all, Pearl, I think we posed a question to you, which was in relation to your Fringe Farming report that Cardiff has just published. I wonder if you'd be happy just to take a couple of minutes to talk us through some of the key findings and what you're hoping might come out of the publication of this report.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone. I'm really glad to be here today. So yeah, we've just published our report about our fringe farming work. So our report documents really, and I would say, an initial exploration that we've taken with about 25 stakeholders to identify the opportunities, barriers and potential actions to increasing agroecological farming in the Cardiff peri-urban region. So we've had a real mix of stakeholders involved, from farmers and growers, farmers unions, landowners, policymakers and others, including NGOs, food partnerships and retailers. I think initially, to say, one of the key findings for us really early on in the project was the need to take a bit more of a regional approach to the work. So we originally started looking very much at the Cardiff local authority area. And because we've got the existing food partnership, we've got lots of contacts and relationships already. But it really quickly became clear that this would really limit the kind of impact of the work, especially when we're talking about commercial farming rather than just looking at community farming. I know there can be crossover between the two as well, but looking really at that sort of more commercial element, Cardiff is a county that borders 4 other local authority areas. So we have the Vale of Glamorgan to the west and slightly to the south, RCT and Caerphilly to the north and Newport to the east. And we also have more rural areas such as Monmouthshire, which are only kind of 30-40 mile radius around. So this is quite important when we were discussing some of the things around barriers and opportunities, particularly with land. So in the pre-event questionnaire, participants really identified land access as the top barrier in terms of agroecological food production. But then when we were discussing it within the workshop, there was a real mix of experiences and opinions, and it was quite complex. So it was identified, land availability was identified as an issue within the Cardiff local authority area itself, but potentially less of an issue in the wider peri-urban region. Many participants did feel that there was quite, the market was quite competitive in terms of land, kind of raising issues around housing, things like tree production and solar farms competing with food growing, and that also pricing out new entrants from the market as well. But there were some examples of opportunities with land, such as Farming Connect Venture, who matched farmers and landowners with new entrants, and lots of other projects who were matching landowners and new entrants as well. Some existing growers and farmers felt that there was plenty of land available, and people gave multiple examples of land being advertised, but there were other barriers in terms of accessing that land, such as not enough market demand for agroecological food or lack of skilled workers, kind of stopping people expanding their business into land that was available. So we all, lots of participants discussed the fact that farming requires skilled workers and identified an opportunity to upskill both new entrants and existing farmers to adopt more agroecological practices, and discussions around kind of ways to develop career pathways into dignified land-based livelihoods, which offers job security and pay a living wage. And then regard to the market demand, there were discussions about both the physical infrastructure needed, such as transport routes and food hubs, as well as the opportunities to market to citizens, both through educational establishments and running campaigns and that sort of thing. And then finally, one of the largest barriers and opportunities that people felt was the Agricultural Wales Bill 2022, which is coming into place at the moment, and provides the framework for future agricultural support in Wales. And people felt that they could influence the scheme, that there's still ability to influence, but a lot of people were sort of holding off planning how they use their land until that's more defined and published. So that was just a really quick overview of the things we discussed. You can see we fitted a lot into quite a half day. But I think the main thing that we came away with is people were really, really kind of passionate to keep on working on this. People have been meeting up collaboratively to look at different opportunities. And I think there was an overwhelming agreement to hold further workshops and discussions with that regional scope, probably looking at the Cardiff City region, to enable more people to come together, look at the next steps and work collaboratively. So that was a brief overview of what came out.
Thank you for that, Pearl. I'm sure we'll come back. I mean, I think what one of the things that you've picked up on is quite interesting, which is how this peri-urban fringe almost acts as the gateway between some of our larger urban conurbations and our sort of rural hinterland, where there is more room for growing and more. So, you know, it's how can the peri-urban sort of almost start to unlock these discussions, even if it's not unlocking the land in itself. So it's really, really interesting to hear. It sounds like you've got a lot to digest, and I know that the report is just out. Do you know what happens next? It's more just sort of working out a bit of a strategy with that region and taking it from there, is it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a lot of quite exciting things happening, and I think Liz might talk about some of them later, but I think in terms of the role of Food Cardiff and our kind of food partnership work, I think that's the next steps, as we want to convene more people who want to be working on this on that regional approach.
Fantastic. Which segues quite nicely over to Mark. So Mark, as you know, we were both involved in a team a couple of years ago that produced a similar report for London, and has since been sort of working on trying to implement that action plan. So we wanted to invite you to just give us a brief overview of what's happened since this report and what have been the main challenges in terms of accessing land.
Great, thanks. First of all, a slight apology for background noise. I had some domestic internet and electricity issues today, so I'm having to do this from a cafe. I'm going to try and share my screen. I'm not entirely sure that that's going to... No, that's not going to happen. Sophie, could you possibly share my presentation? Great, thank you. Yeah, as Sarah said, the kind of fringe farming work in London was a bit of a precursor really to the national fringe farming project that Ario spoke about. And we did some work sort of pre-pandemic that led to the development of a bit of an action plan for London to try and look at how we could expand fringe farming in London. So next slide, please. And that kind of broke down into three main areas, two of which really I'm going to talk about today. So kind of access to and protection of land, policy change and implementation, and training and skills. And in particular, one of the things that we identified there was, or some of the things we've identified there were developing a business case for local authorities and landowners so as to why they should provide land for food and farming, and also developing more joined up routes and pathways for training and skills as well to address that need, and meeting with individual local authorities about their food and land policies. Next slide, please. One of the ways that we've done this over the last kind of year or so, 18 months, has been through some funding that we received from the Greater London Authority through their Challenge London programs. And we worked with, as well as Sustain, we worked with Ubele and a communications organisation, Cohere, Organically, and Sutton Community Farm as two practitioners, to look at whether we could create that kind of compelling business case for local authorities and landowners, and also a commercial service offer to support them in bringing land forward for peri-urban growing. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this was this kind of perception, I guess, a sense that food and farming is seen as a low value land use. And so we wanted to challenge that and create an evidence base to try and address that perception. The next slide, please. And so we engaged Commonwealth think tank to develop a model, a business case model, which is adaptable for any farm site. So any farm can put their own details in here. This is for Sutton Community Farm, which is in South London. It employs 11 people, and it's quite a simple model really, but it looks, if you look at that kind of table at the top, you have the direct financial revenue that's generated by the organisation. So it's income from sales and grants and training, and then also a labour value, which is what they're spending on wages, but also kind of the value of volunteers and other people that are working on site. And then it also ascribes some value to some of the wider social, economic and environmental benefits that are created by the farm. So skills enhancement through the training and employment of volunteering opportunities that they provide, and also cost saved through things like sort of cost saved to the criminal justice system, cost saved in terms of addressing environmental damage, biodiversity loss, and then creates a value for those. So you can see that the value that's created by Sutton in a year is about 4 times the actual kind of financial revenue that they're bringing in. So I think it begins to give a really good sense of the value that these farms can provide. And the model will also, as we develop it, provide a 25-year value over the lifetime of the farm as well. And so we're hoping that that will be of use to local authority officers to kind of convince their estates department that this is actually a good use of land, despite the fact that it might not bring in a lot of money as a kind of lease value to the authority, that it's creating these wider social, economic and environmental values. Next slide, please. And then the second part of this GLA funded program was developing a service for local authorities. So sort of identifying that there's a piece of work to be done around kind of creating an argument internally so that they can build a broad kind of cross-departmental support for bringing land into farming. Support to then get them on site, so the creation of tenancies, leases, ensuring the right tenure and planning are in place, and then scaling and sustainability, so supporting the farm business once it's on site. And what we're looking at the moment to secure some funding to pilot this approach with a number of different London local authorities. And then next slide, please. And just finally, on the training element, just to highlight that we've also, with Land Workers Alliance, Ubele Organically, and East Hill Veg Company, who are in Suffolk, have secured some funding from DEFRA as one of 5 pilots of a new entrant support scheme for new entrant farmers. And it's providing them with kind of business skills, so not horticultural skills, but kind of business sustainability skills. And that program will be running from January to April. So we're currently recruiting to both the startup program and the scale up program. And that will provide, that's also being run in the Southwest by Land Workers Alliance and partners there as well. So I think, beginning to deliver on some of those elements of the London Fringe Farming plan through a variety of different, bringing together a variety of different other funding streams and programs.
Fantastic.
So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I think I saw a specific question pop up, which I thought might be interesting to ask, which was, how did they calculate the value, the sort of inherent value of the work that Sutton do? Is there sort of existing research they used?
Yeah, so they did draw on existing research, and that's kind of referenced in the model, so we can potentially share that and put share the references to the work that was used to develop those values.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's really helpful and really helpful work. And I saw a question which I think we'll probably come back to at a later point in today's discussion about what strategies people have used in order to gain access to land. And I would say, there are as many strategies as there are people and places. And one of the key things that we wanted to get out of the Fringe Farming work was to make this less about who and opportunism in the right time at the right place, and make it more of a systematic, accessible, inclusive approach to gaining access to land, and that is easier to say than it is to do. So we'll come back to some of the strategies that people have used to gain access to land, if that's okay. So I wanted to take this opportunity now to introduce the rest of the panel and to get onto some other questions. I have we've got quite a gang here today, so it's really great. So bear with me while I do introduce our fellow panelists. So we've got Liz Lambert, who's over with Pearl there today in Cardiff, and she's worked in the sustainable development field for 25 years for local government, voluntary sector, and international development. Currently is the Sustainable Development Team Lead at Cardiff Council, and so her work is obviously about integrating sustainability into the policies and practices across the local authority. We've got Miriam from Social Farms and Gardens, who has worked and volunteered in community gardens in Northern Ireland for around 19 years, from starting with Friends of groups, working on pieces of derelict land, to her current role at Social Farms and Gardens, and has been working quite closely with council officers in Northern Ireland, so has got a lot of insight into how we can start to work with local authorities to overcome those barriers. So I should get you to give a wave, Miriam, and we will come back to you. We have Sandy Patterson from Glasgow. Glasgow City Council is the assistant manager for food growing at the council. Yes, they actually have a team of people working on food growing, which is amazing up there. And his remit covers all elements of food growing, so from community gardens to allotments to peri-urban farm. And so they've been responsible for the development and implementation of a food growing strategy, which some of you may know is a requirement across all of the Scottish local authorities. We also have Dav Shand, who is from the Lauriston Garden and a director and the Market Garden Coordinator, and so has got many years of working in community supported agriculture and growing co-ops, and is the founding member of Edinburgh Agroecology Co-op at Lauriston Farm. So we've got a fantastic panel. So without further ado, I'm just going to, Hannah, I know you're also here. I haven't missed you, but we're going to come back to you in another part. So just to introduce you and to give a bit of context, I think, first of all, I'm going to head over to Miriam and just wondered if you wanted to give us some policy context and whether you feel that there are local and national policies that are already in place that have helped councils to make progress on accessing peri-urban growing.
Yeah. Well, so we've been working in Northern Ireland and talking to council officers in all 11 of our councils over the last couple of years, trying to understand what the barriers are to access to public land for community growing. And and in that time looking into what supportive policies there are. So speaking at a Northern Ireland level anyway, the interesting thing about Northern Ireland is we don't have a statutory duty to provide community growing space. So everywhere else in the UK there is some legislation that supports this, except for Northern Ireland and London. So for that reason, it is interesting for us to work with local councils, because I suppose that's a level of government that we can have some influence on, and that also can maybe start to put some policies in place to ensure that people have this right. So we have legislation. We have a 1932 Allotment Act, but we don't have there's no duty to provide land there. So that's sort of what we're working with. We've been looking at planning policy. So in Northern Ireland, there's a 2-tier planning system. There's decisions that are made about strategic planning decisions, and that's one level, and then all local decisions are made at a council level. And at the minute, there's local development plans being developed for all 11 of the councils. So there's an opportunity there in Northern Ireland, I think, to get community growing written into those local development plans.
Yeah.
And for example, to write things in about new housing developments, that there should be space for food growing planned into them as well. So that's an opportunity. And again, it's like it's identifying these opportunities, and then it's trying to figure out how to have influence at that level. So that's something else that we're working on. Yeah, and then so the local development plans in Northern Ireland, there's a statutory link between them and the community plans. So since 2015, we've had community planning in councils in Northern Ireland. And the idea of community planning was to be that communities would have an input into spatial planning based on services that are needed by the community. I think that you guys have community planning in England as well in councils, but we've had that since 2015.
I think we call it neighbourhood planning, is that right? I don't know if there's any experts on planning in the room, but I think, yeah, there's neighbourhood planning.
And I think it's okay to say that there's maybe a general sense of like slight disappointment that community planning hasn't really worked the way that, because it sounded like such a great idea whenever it was coming in. It was like, oh yeah, like the communities could input into spatial planning based on local need. And I don't think that that's necessarily what has happened. So it's sort of that thing of, do we work with a system that isn't working, or you know, and a community plan also was supposed to be that so the other thing I should say, councils in Northern Ireland don't have responsibility for schools or for housing. There's separate public bodies that deal with those things. So councils in Northern Ireland don't have access to the same amount of land as councils elsewhere. But community planning is supposed to coordinate communication and information, like access to who owns what land or whatever, there as well. So in some councils there's actually good communication. So like, I'm pleased to find out that yes, we can find out what land the housing executive owns. In other councils it doesn't work so much there. So sometimes it's about sort of like figuring out, well, what's working and how do we kind of kickstart that information sharing process. And then yeah, local development plans. We've got in Northern Ireland, we've got I'm just doing Northern Ireland based, I hope that's okay. We've got, I know that there's some colleagues here from Northern Ireland, so hi to everybody from Northern Ireland. We've got the DAERA, the Northern Ireland Food Strategy Framework, which was really close to being passed just before Stormont shut down in February, which was a pity, but we had conversations with Joy Alexander from DAERA, and we're pleasantly surprised that it really closely aligned, the food strategy framework really closely aligned with the Sustainable Food Places 6 key priorities. So there was a lot of overlap there. So that was, and I think that was a coincidence. You know, they were surprised to find that out as well, but it just, those are the areas that they were focused on as well. So that was really encouraging. And then,
so I mean, that's quite translatable, isn't it? If any areas are looking at developing food strategies and are hopefully following the guidance of Sustainable Food Places, then trying to find ways to bring peri-urban or land access into those strategies is really key, and something that could probably apply to all nations.
Yeah. It's really useful. Is it okay if have I got another 2 minutes?
We got 1 minute.
Okay, I'll go really fast then. So we've got the Northern Ireland Climate Change Act, which there'll be sectoral plans written up for. Yeah, and then I mean, just Sustainable Food Places is just brilliant. It's just I think 5 councils in Northern Ireland are doing it at the minute. if they're signed up to it, there's really clear actions there for them to achieve. And it just focused on that communication as well. And not only is it communication within a council area, but communication, we have like a Northern Ireland cohort of Sustainable Food Places council officers that are then meeting up with each other and learning from each other. So I think that's also brilliant. Yeah, so that's our policy context. Yeah,
and that's really helpful. And I think as well, you know, just understanding that we've got a colleague, Gillian Morgan, who leads on all of our planning work and has put together many planning toolkits, mainly England based, but I would advise anyone based in England to take a look at them and to just start to get to know and understand some of those planning frameworks. As flawed as they may be, they are useful to have up your sleeve. I'm going to hand over and bring Liz in here actually. I don't know, Liz, if you've got anything else to add in terms of the sort of existing policies that you found useful over in your work in Cardiff, but also to ask you how you're sort of investing in food growing and how you're sort of supporting startups in terms of new entrants into farming.
Yeah, great, thank you. That was really interesting to hear another regional perspective in terms of the planning and the policy. It's always good to hear other people's perspectives there. As you've kind of heard earlier from Pearl, when you look at Cardiff itself, we haven't got that much spare land, shall we say, that hasn't already been built on or hasn't been allocated for something. You probably look at the city at the moment and think there's loads of green space around it, but this has all been allocated through our local development plan in the last plan for a housing allocation and for economic development, which are targets set at Welsh Government level that we then have to enact, so we can't. I think we've got the population down a little bit from what we were asked to deliver, but still there's not a huge amount of spare land. So we're looking very much at a city region approach in Cardiff, because we are surrounded by many other local authorities that have more land that's available for growing, in particular for commercial growing. So we're very much taking this city region approach, and we've got in the South East Wales area, we've got the Cardiff Capital Region, the CCR. So that's comprised of the 10 local authorities in South East Wales, working with Welsh Government and also working with UK Government on combined commitments and bringing together resources, and most importantly, bringing together finance. If you look at the population in those 10 local authorities, it's about 1.5 million, which I know in the context of English populations isn't that big, but that's half the population of Wales just in those 10 local authorities in South East Wales. So, you know, great capacity that if we can do projects there, that we can influence quite a bit there. So we've had some money from the CCR. We've had 2.6 million challenge fund money to look at a two-pronged challenge that we're right in the midst of now. The challenge is just closed and we are just assessing bids at the moment. But it's looking at both production of healthy low carbon food and then also supply of healthy low carbon food. We've asked bidders to ideally go for both of those challenges, but we will accept bids on one or the other, and ideally to perform in consortia so that we can look at getting things to scale up eventually. So there's three phases of the challenge. There's a feasibility, there's a demonstrator, and then there's a scale up. So like I said, we're right in the process of assessing bids, and hopefully by Christmas we'll know who our feasibilities are going to be. So that's all really exciting. Lots of money going into that. And then the second project I wanted to talk about is courgettes. Getting courgettes into our Cardiff schools and getting them onto, you know, the kids' plates. So we did a project over this summer working with already a scheme that is in existence in Cardiff called Food and Fun, which is very much a school holiday programme. It's in some ways it's a holiday hunger programme. It's for the children who are on free school meals to make sure that they're getting a decent meal during the holidays as well. But it's also bringing the fun element. So, you know, those kids who might not get to go away on day trips or to go on a holiday, to also do some fun and exciting stuff too. So we worked together with a local wholesaler and a new entry grower to get these courgettes through the supply chain. And this was very much, we hadn't had a decent wholesaler that we've been working with for a number of years on food contracts within Cardiff and within the region. I don't think it would have taken off without the goodwill of that wholesaler wanting to make the commitment. And then also having our local grower who isn't quite in Cardiff, they're just on the outskirts of it, because we just haven't got the land take to be doing that growing. And so we had, I think it was 29 schools in total taking part. And we had almost a ton of these agroecologically produced courgettes going into those 29 primary schools over 3 weeks of the Food and Fun programme. And I'm going to have to look at the number because I can't remember this one. We had 1,469 children getting the opportunity to try Welsh locally grown courgettes. So we made it fun. It wasn't just about, you know, here's your courgettes, eat them. These were done as an extra food, so that if they didn't like them for some reason, they were still getting a decent meal that day, but equally there was something to try. But getting them involved in the cooking of it, looking at the vegetable, just, you know, touching it, seeing what it looked like, because kids can be quite funny, can't they, about new things. They even did some art with the courgettes, which tickled me somewhat, because I saw there was a courgette penguin was made by one child. It's just, when the report comes up, we'll send it through. So that was all great. And like I said, really did have, you know, having a good wholesaler on board, having a good grower. But what we did find coming out of this project is very much that it costs more to produce in this way. It financially does cost more. Whilst there's other amazing sustainability benefits around having it local, knowing your supply chain, it did cost more. And I think it was, just have a look at my stats here, it was 90p per kilogram more. So the courgettes that we could have bought through the wholesaler from Holland cost £1.60 per kilo, and these were costing £2.50 to produce. So there is a financial cost in there that does need to be bared in mind. But looking for the future of how we take this forward, we'd like to have a wider variety of vegetables being grown. It was courgettes in this project due to the timing of the year and the land that we had and what we thought the meals could be made for the kids. And also then maybe getting the children to be able to actually visit the farm as well, where they're being grown, so they can see that connection of, you know, farm to fork, so they're not just thinking, oh, that comes from the supermarket. They know where that veg comes from.
Just quickly, Liz, before we finish off on this point, I just wondered if, in terms of, you know, the experience that you've got from Cardiff, what's been the real selling point? How have you managed to get that much funding and this much level of interest? I mean, what's the hook when you are looking at something that ultimately costs more?
I think we're very much using, so there's a piece of national legislation in Wales called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is a sustainable development legislation, first in the world to do this. And so we can pull on that to point out, you know, it's not just about cost. I think also good linkages with health, talking about, you know, getting more vegetables into schools. But, you know, sometimes it does come down to cost and budgets. And as I'm sure you're all aware, you know, local government, central government, we're all, you know, a bit tight on the funds at the moment.
I mean, yeah, we'll come back to that in the context of the Bridging the Gap programme that we've been looking at and how you do justify that cost. And I suppose that's some of the stuff that Mark was talking about.
Yeah. On this particular courgette pilot, it was the wholesaler who absorbed the cost.
Yeah.
They agreed to do that because they believed in the project. But, you know, you're not always going to get that.
Yeah, that's the challenge with procurement. They've managed to drive down their prices so much in other areas. I'm going to quickly bring Sandy in just to tell us again, to follow in a bit on that local authority perspective, and to tell us a bit about you know, what advice you might, I know you've had a really sort of comprehensive approach in Glasgow, but from your learning, can you give any advice to any areas with sort of less resource or political support? What do you think have been the sort of easiest and quickest wins within your experience of embedding food growing in a place?
Thanks for having us along, Fief. What springs into me is strength of our networks in Glasgow. We've had a very active community growing scene in Glasgow for a number of years now, and they were perfectly positioned to support and deliver and actually push the local authority to expand on land availability. In fact, they pretty much didn't wait for the local authority to provide permission. They got on and done it, and then we supported where we possibly could. I mean, simply put, it's speaking with the current growers, and are they activated? Are they talking to each other? Do they understand the power that they contain within them? Would a variety of growing techniques be applicable as well? Because there was previously a schism, if you like, between the traditional allotment folks in Glasgow and the community gardens. What came out of that, though, is quite a cohesive network called the Glasgow Community Food Network, and is Abby alluded to as well. And they seem to be heading in the right direction. From that, what's becoming apparent is there is an increasing demand for folks that are looking to actually develop market gardens, peri-urban and fringe.
Right.
For us, the biggest driver for that, in a political sense, is the declaration of the climate and ecological emergency and the action plan arising from that. That gave us the political leverage that we needed to impact the system change. It's a big tanker to turn around. It is slow, the size of the organisation. But we're certainly making inroads into it, perhaps not as quickly as I would like, or as other activists in the city around food growing would like as well. But we're not just trying to kind of browbeat people into it, we're trying to take them on the journey along with us and showing them the benefits, a holistic regenerative agricultural approach to improving our soil conditions, therefore improving our biodiversity, improving the nutrient loads within the produce, the lowered food miles associated with the food supply chain, and getting the food to those that need it most, i.e. our communities, social, economic disadvantaged.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the pillars of the Fringe Farming project from my perspective, was to see how we could use the climate and nature emergency plans to really embed this. And I don't know if any of you have seen the Food for the Planet report that's been put out by the team at Sustain, but we've been measuring local authorities in terms of what they're putting in terms of food into those plans, and it's not great at the moment, but we feel like that is a real key opportunity. So it's really interesting to hear that, Sandy, and also just to hear about the power of those networks. I think sometimes networks are sort of great at sharing information, but they can forget that they've got that collective power, which I suppose is what we're hearing through Pam's stuff on Right to Grow and some of the other work that's going on. So that's really fantastic to hear. I wanted to come to Dav in a minute, just to hear a bit about your experience of starting up. But Miriam, I know you were really keen to come back in on how we can really support local authority officers. We're all on a bit of a journey, aren't we, to try and demonstrate the benefit and the impact, and why local authorities do that. And I think sometimes local authority officers need some support. So was there something you wanted to add, Miriam, before?
Yeah, no, it was just I think that I had just had to think about as well about the work that we've been doing, and we've been supported by a lot of the people here in this work that we've been doing with council officers, and we've been working over the last couple of years and just really listening as well to the officers and sort of what their challenges are from within the role. And so some of the challenges that have come up are competing land use. So like so many of the officers I've talked to, for example, they're planting trees. They're sort of signed up to pledges to plant trees. Like Belfast, they're planting 1 million trees. And when they went to find land to plant the trees, they realised that actually the council doesn't have that much land. And then there's these competing land uses like biodiversity and housing, and I suppose the population is getting bigger, and so that's one of the things that council officers are working with. Another is talking to council officers, some of whom are here today, is just if we're going to increase the amount of land for community growing, whose job is it going to be to manage that, and am I going to get an extra staff member to do this? Because if not, that's going to actually put loads more pressure on my job. So understandably there's some resistance or some hesitation there. One of the things council officers said was that a lack of targets coming from above. So that's the work we've been doing, is try and get councils adopting a standard of provision, like the Fields and Trust 6 acre standard. So something the equivalent to that adopted at council level, so that there's a target amount of provision that's being provided. And then as well, whenever you're working with individual council officers, like they're just working in their department, they don't have strategic oversight, but this touches on so many different departments. So I was just going to list a couple of who should be at a meeting. This is the thing, I'd love to go into councils, and I've been offering now, and hopefully I'm getting taken up on that, to go in and facilitate a meeting within a council with the relevance. It sounds a bit like what Mark's been doing in shared assets as well, so I'd like to get talking to you about that. But like, it would be great at a meeting to have the chief executive, the GIS officer, community planning officer, the assets or land and property people, the parks people, sustainability and biodiversity people, and the community development people. So if you get all them in and sort of say like, how are we going to make this happen? I mean, that could happen at a Sustainable Food Places meeting as well. So it could also identify, identifying the cross-sectoral forums that exist, like Sustainable Food Places, like neighbourhood renewal. But I have one more point, Sarah. That whenever you're working in any council, even the council officers that get it and are passionate about it, it's knowing how to work the system. It's not, so you can spend years, and I have spent years trying to do everything through the official channels and trying to do everything right, and the work can still get deprioritized. So it sort of comes back to what Pam is saying. It's like you need to prove that you've done everything through the correct channels, and you've like looked at all the policies that support what you're trying to do, and that you've dotted all the I's and everything like that. But then at the end of the day, I think that a campaign, like a public campaign, just putting pressure and having a bit of sight into what the processes are, and are they working, and if not, what needs to change and what needs to be done outside of the proper policies and procedures and processes. So just to support what Pam's doing.
And Sandy, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come back on the point that Miriam just raised?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Miriam was saying there. It's one of the things we recognised straight away as we were engaging with our growers across the city, was this requirement to stop the silo working within local authorities and never as twain shall mix. So we've got a group that comprises of, if you like, sports people, procurement people, planning, open space, economic development, corporate development, community team, but also education and health and social care. They're the two big ones, in my opinion. They're the ones that have got access to land as well, and making the case for your education department to get that food growing learning established into the curriculum as early as you possibly can, give a new generation of growers that then can come through pretty much skilled up and are not as disengaged from their environment as the current last 2 or 3 generations appear to have been.
Andy, I might have to stop you in a sec because I just want to make sure we get a chance to hear from Dav, who's been waiting patiently.
No problem.
But thank you for that. I think that this is one of the key opportunities around this agenda, is that how many different departments, but that also makes it the biggest challenge, right? Is that it's got like a little bit to do with every department. So where do we really sell the story? But we will come back to that hopefully if we get a time in the open Q&A bit. But I just wanted to make sure we heard from Dav. So Dav, you're a success story. You got the dream, you got the land. So I just wanted to see if there was anything you could share in terms of the strategy that you took in terms of accessing land, and also what sort of helped and hindered you on that journey.
Hi, yeah. So I guess just briefly, we have a 25-year lease from Edinburgh Council for 100 acres on the edge of Edinburgh. We neighbour some of the most marginalised areas in Edinburgh and some of the most affluent areas in Edinburgh. So there's a real sort of sense that you have real food poverty and the need for that local provision very directly on the doorstep. But we also have people who are interested in a broad scope of what we're doing, not just the food production, but also the biodiversity, community and so on. So we're trying to do a bit of cross-class organising on that land to build the capacity of the community there. Initially, it was really my colleagues working in Northwest Edinburgh on food and community issues for a number of years. And they approached the council about this specific piece of land and said, just a sort of single A4 sheet to the council saying, can we not make better use of this land? It was a sheep farmer that had it for a number of years on a rolling annual lease and based in Fife, so travelling, and there was concerns about the farming practice there as well. We had a very positive response from Edinburgh Council. They said, please come back with a sort of a full feasibility study and a business plan for what you'd like to do on the land. And going through that process with them is obviously time consuming. There was a pandemic in the middle of that. But they were very supportive, and we were able to raise a small amount of money to do that feasibility study quite thoroughly and put a really nice business plan together that allowed the council to have the confidence that what we were proposing was viable alternative to housing or other competing interests for a piece of land that is really in the city itself.
Okay, so getting your business case together and really understanding the number crunching, and I think you're right, a lot of the stuff is about confidence in that land.
Absolutely,
so
yeah.
So I sort of wanted to open it up to the floor, really. I mean, we had a question earlier, which I thought was a good way of framing it, about what strategies have we seen people using in order to gain access to land, and what do we think is working and isn't working? And is there anyone that would want to come in?
If I could just, just the Lauriston Farms experience of that is that support in writing up a business case, but also working with existing community groups. We've really grown out of very strong long-term community organisations in many ways that are we're allowing them to scale up with the access to land because we have secured Lauriston Farm. So having existing community groups that can come on board very quickly with their networks has also been key for us.
Right. I wanted to bring Hannah in now. Hannah Lee Mackey is a community food grower from Granville Community Kitchen in over in northwest London, and they have a sort of fantastic project over there, which Hannah will tell you a bit more. And then she had a sort of similar question to frame to the panel. Hannah, do you want to tell us a bit more about what you've been doing over at Granville?
Yeah, sure. So we are a community food justice project in northwest London in Kilburn. And we run community meals and community food growing on mini market gardens, and we have a sliding scale veg box as well. And I guess I'm bringing a concrete example of just how challenging it currently can be to access land, even if I know it really varies from council to council, of course, but just in this case with yeah, even if like as we're sort of ready to go in terms of having access to some resources for the setup, we have the skilled workers, experience in networks to access markets, and to deliver the societal benefits that Mark mentioned, because the project is very much about integrating that kind of community progressive stuff. So we've been looking for nearly 2 years and have had a couple of false starts, as the commercial market isn't very friendly to community focused outcomes, before you even get to the challenge of making it function and creating enough income for living wages within a very unequal distribution system. So yeah, it'd be great to hear any more thoughts from the panel on where or how best in this moment to intervene strategically in order to release the land that is or could be available from local authorities. Obviously this is a specific regional example, and I'm really inspired to hear about Lauriston Farm. But yeah, just sort of what's that next step to match up the demand and opportunity within the realities of the current system when we come up against this hard edge of the economic way it works. And also if there's any local authority people here who have like 5 to 10 acres available within the peri-urban areas around the edges of North London, then let us know.
So yeah, the question is how what are the strategies you can take, or what the next steps you can take against this sort of hard. Yeah, do you want to sort of frame?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess because it's a difficult question, because actually it's hard to think of it in a systemic way because we're thinking about it geographically. So we're limited to land outside London, which obviously has its very specific pressures on it. And I guess my sense is that it does vary so much council to council, and I wonder whether it's like concrete policy proposals or concrete kind of like campaigns or concrete just what with the collective knowledge of this panel, like what are areas of like hope or excitement that we could focus on? Does that make sense?
Yeah, anyone got any tips for Granville crew on how they could take the next step and try and access land? I mean, I don't want to pick on people unnecessarily, but I will. But Mark, I mean, what do you think in terms of the business case and the sort of scheme that you're developing? I mean, how would that work if there's not actually land within a borough? I suppose is the point, Hannah. There's not land in the borough of Brent, so you need to go further out.
Yeah, and even within that, I mean, we're looking currently all across the kind of north edges. We've looked out on the northwest side, and now we're looking in the northeast, so we can go quite far just within it needs to be near enough that we can maintain a relationship with the community in Kilburn, which a lot of us is about getting the people to connect up with the site as well, so it can't be too far away to reach our existing community market.
Yeah, I mean, there's no magic bullet to this one, right? But I think that in terms of places to start, it might be looking at kind of if they have a kind of a county farm, like a local authority farm estate, and looking at what they're doing with that. And I think kind of engaging around kind of making that social, economic, and environmental value case for the use of public land. I mean, I think more broadly, in terms of kind of campaigning, I think protection of that estate, ensuring it's not sold off, protection of high quality growing land, grade 1 and 2 growing land, and I mean, I know that you also have been looking at kind of privately owned sites as well, but sort of so I think there again it's kind of whether or not in terms of campaigns is looking at kind of if there are peri-urban areas with a lot of high quality growing land, whether there's a campaign to be made around ensuring that if those are sold off, that they stay in production, rather than being taken out of it or going into kind of horticulture or whatever it might be that kind of takes away that productive land.
Great, thank you for that, Mark. Is there anyone else that wanted to sort of give any feedback on that, sort of as a real world example of, you know, we're looking for land, we've got the resources to grow on it, the people that want to eat it, but yeah, finding it is the barrier. One of the things I was wondering was, I was thinking about, we had once this idea of the notion of feeder farms, where perhaps every sort of inner city or London borough or you know, urban area should have some relationship, I suppose, with an area that's more rural. So how do we create connections between places? Because I think that's part of the challenge, isn't it? Is not just sort of arriving in the middle of somebody else's area and growing food, although that's what we do all the time, but you know, that's not the system you're trying to recreate. So how could you build a meaningful connection with another place where there is more land? So that I'm not saying I've got that answer, but in terms of making this more of a systematic approach rather than a one-off, I think that is some of the challenges is building out relationships with other places. So it'd be interesting to see, you know, what areas, you know, near enough to London, but not necessarily in London, you could be building those relationships with. Does anyone else want to come in before I head off to some of the other questions that might touch upon this as well? Miriam.
Just Social Farms and Gardens has the Community Land Advisory Service, so you can just look them up and they have lots of resources and advice.
Yeah, and I know some people have also been talking to land agents about you know, what some opportunities might be in terms of land opportunities. Obviously there's some stuff about the financials that get tricky. I mean, what I see at a local level is much more about networks and opportunism, which is is where you may end up in just talking to the right person at the right time. But in terms of taking a systemic approach, then yeah, I think that's still a question that we need to be getting to grips with. Okay, is that anything else to come in on in terms of sort of that specific example, or I'm going to bring up another question that came in from our attendees. Someone, I think there was is there another? Oh no, all the questions have been answered. Maya, I don't know if there was any question that you wanted to bring in that's already been answered from the Q&A, or if not, I can go to one of my many on my list.
I think they've all been covered in the Q&A actually, so if you'd like to go to a different one.
Yeah, so there was a question that came in about a couple of questions about sort of local authorities and where do we start, which may be tied in. So Liz, there was a question here about is public sector procurement partnering with smaller scale farmers like you've been doing a step in the right direction towards the sort of change that we need to see? And do you think that the approach you've taken over there in terms of looking at public procurement is one that we should be following up on?
I think it's one of many mechanisms you need to look at, because obviously the amount of food that you need to get onto the public plate is massive in terms of the tonnage. So I think you can do some of your contracts working with those local growers, but ultimately, you know, we're not going to be self-sufficient for the food that we grow in the UK, but we can, you know, we can start working towards getting more onto the public plate. So yes, I would say the type of stuff we've done great, but it's probably not a one size fits all.
Yeah,
I think most local authorities are similar to ours, and that there'll be a framework for your food purchasing, and it's trying to get then that local grower into that framework as one of the elements.
And I mean, both for you and for Pearl, I think, you know, there's a question here that came in about public health in local authorities. I mean, what do you think public health departments and teams can do in terms of supporting agroecological growing? It feels like there's opportunities there, but there's a sort of bit of a distant relationship between sustainable farming and public health at the moment. Is there anything more we can do to bring those two agendas together?
So in Wales, just to be clear, public health doesn't sit within the local authority.
Right.
It's separately, but we have a great relationship with public health on not just the food work that we do, but many other different things that we do in Cardiff. But I'll let her answer that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's looking at the sustainable food places approach, and I think because we, like many other places, are taking that approach, we're able to link in public health with local authorities, with the agroecological food growing. So we have on our Food Cardiff strategy board, we have a mixture of council, public health, some people who are on the call today from markets and from the agricultural side as well. And I think the more we're seeing sustainable food partnerships across rural areas as well as urban areas, will really facilitate those links as well.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I was also going to come in and say, Mark, back to you again. I mean, what, in your experience, when you've had success working at a local level, what has helped? What have local authorities done when it, to actually sort of facilitate and enable projects to happen at a local level? Have you got some good examples when this has worked?
I mean, as with all of these things, I think the critical thing is having at least one person who's a champion for this work and has got a real kind of like commitment to making it work. And because they quite often have to do a lot of engagement both inside the authority and outside it. And then I think, you know, it being tied to other local strategies and other local policies that kind of give them a bit of leverage with those colleagues. And then a kind of, I guess, a willingness to engage outside, so a recognition of what they don't know and where to go for that kind of help and support. So I think I'm just thinking of a couple of London authorities one of whom has given the site over to peri-urban growing, another one is currently thinking about it, and I think in both cases they've sort of gone, we don't know how best to support this, like so we need to engage with sort of some existing growers in order to understand what we as the authority can do for the best. So kind of like, what kind of investment do we need? What kind of support do we need? What kind of tenure do you need in order to make this worthwhile? So I think that kind of openness to trying to make it work from the perspective of the grower is really, really important.
Yeah, so more conversations at the start to really work out what it is they're looking for. That's really interesting. I was also going to bring, I think there's a couple of questions in the Q&A and I will come back to them. But before I did, I just wanted to bring Ario in really. We got, and sort of maybe leaning a bit to focus on some of the sort of national level policy stuff that can be done to help this. So we've heard about sort of aspirations around Pam's and colleagues' right to grow. But someone asked a question about sort of agro-environmental schemes and the sort of changes that are going on there. So the question was, could greenbelt land be part of agro-environmental schemes that include provision for intensive small-scale organic market gardens? And also sort of more generally, what conversations are happening with the ideas of rezoning greenbelt? So Ari, I don't know if you could respond on that one.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, greenbelt land is very relevant because it's peri-urban land. But it's also just a great planning tool. I think it started in late 30s and in London and went kind of national scale in the 50s. But it was really kind of forward-thinking government kind of decision-making in terms of how to protect land from the urban sprawl. And a lot of it is farmed, and a lot of it is definitely relevant to the kind of farming we want. Or at least the land is relevant to the kind of farming we want. And in terms of what schemes are available that could help these, I mean, so the agri-environmental schemes, they're now rebranded as the environmental land management schemes. And they still exist, although the new government have put into question what they will look like and how they'll run. So it's still a bit up in the air exactly how that will be. And one issue for our project, at least, is that there is a 5-hectare eligibility limit. So that means that farms which are less than 5 hectares aren't eligible for the environmental land management schemes at the moment. But then DEFRA has said they'll lift this limit in 2024. So we kind of have to put them to account for this. And in terms of what other organizations, or what organizations in general are looking into greenbelt land. So CPRE, the Countryside Charity, they've done like a lot of research and campaigning around greenbelt land. So I would definitely encourage people to look into that. I think the report's called The Countryside Next Door, and that really sets out like why the greenbelt is so important in terms of, I mean, not just farming, but more about having access to green spaces and biodiversity and other public goods, especially for people coming from urban areas. So I think, yeah, I think it's a really good point. Greenbelt land should definitely be discussed.
And I think, I mean, one of the things that why this project is focused on green belts, you know, we should say, is because of that opportunity it presents. You know, it's very protected, it's very close to the market, and it's got huge potential. You did that great calculation in your report, Ario, about the sort of potential. I don't want to get it wrong. Do you know it off the top of your head? I think you calculated that was it 1%?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it's an arbitrary number, just 1% of what kind of returns you can get, and this was based on organically data. So it's just like a lot of jobs. I mean, yeah, it's a very rough calculation, but it's basically a lot of jobs. I can put the link in the chat. Yeah.
So a lot of jobs, a lot of, I think it was sort of millions and millions of pounds of revenue,
Yeah,
from a very, very small change in how that land is used. So I think sort of having those sort of stories nationally to paint the picture of the opportunity are really important. But it sounds like the campaigning on reducing that 5 hectares limit is one of the focuses, right? I know a lot of people are behind sort of changing that. And you know, I suppose, are there any other people sort of championing the use of the greenbelt in this way? Are there other people that we can be connecting with locally? I was thinking, like in London, we're, you know, trying to link up more with CPRE London, who are very much looking at tree planting, and we're trying to sort of stop it being trees or farming, and to sort of show that there's a multifunctional use to a lot of agroecological growing. And I suppose that, yeah, are there other champions we should be reaching out to? Yeah,
absolutely. I come across this nice report from the London Assembly, the Environment Committee. So this is like a panel of people, politicians, who all are very much behind using the green belt for sustainable farming in a very good way. And I think, yeah, so I would say MPs and other local authorities, depending on which green belt you're talking about, they can be your champion for this kind of work, and there are examples happening. So.
Great. Okay, well, listen, we probably need to be finishing off. I just wanted to end on sort of some positive notes, really, from all of our panelists. So it would be great if you could just share one sort of exciting opportunity that you think is going to help with this revival of market gardening, or one piece of national policy that you would like to see going forward. So I'm going to come to I think we've lost Sandy, but I was going to come to Mark. Any national policy or exciting opportunity around the corner that you see?
I think if we could make one policy change, I think it would be to protect grade 1 and grade 2 listed agricultural land and county farms. Stop being sold.
Fantastic. Could I ask the same to Liz and Pearl? Have you got a pearl of wisdom or some sort of policy change that you would like to see?
Yeah, in terms of the national policy, I'd like to see something that would look at where there is this conflict over different, uses of land that we've got. So there is, a hierarchy where a decision is made in policy around what's going to go there, so we're not just fighting over it. And in terms of something exciting, I think it's just, food growing can be a win-win on sustainable development. It's there for health, it can be there for low carbon, it can be there for the local economy. What's not to like?
Fantastic. What's not to like? Love it. Great. Sandy, any big national policy change or exciting opportunity you see around the corner? Oh, you're muted. You won the prize.
Yep. I would suggest national planning form that came up for might be the area where protection for agricultural as well as localised allotment growing could fit in there, and also looking at the place standard as well with food growing that being specifically anything.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Dav, anything you want to add?
It's exciting to hear about projects in other places that are beginning to get a bit of success, and I think just building on these examples to give everybody involved the confidence that we can build viable peri-urban farms.
Yeah, I think confidence is a really important takeaway from all of this. Miriam?
We're working on councils in Northern Ireland adopting a standard of providing the equivalent of 5 full-size allotments per 1,000 households. So that's what we're working on.
Fantastic, a new standard. Last but not least, Ario, anything? the one win you want to see?
Okay, I don't know about one win, but I would
Many, right?
yeah, I would point to Mark's presentation when he referred to the new entrant support scheme pilots. I mean, there's reason to be a bit cautious about how much we want to be optimistic about them, but I think at least they sound promising, and I think these are the kind of things that will really help kind of get new farmers into farming, people from diverse backgrounds, and this is kind of adapting to new challenges that we need. And so I think these kind of things will help, and there already exists a network, the Farm Start Network, which is doing pretty much this. And if the government could support this, use their new entrant support schemes to support this, I think that'd be great.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And I think I was really struck to hear as well, Sandy talking about the power of those local networks and how important they are. And I think for a webinar that's been put on jointly with Sustainable Food Places, that's a really important takeaway for us all, is that we can sort of take back the power and build these movements and networks locally. We don't have to keep waiting. So I think, let's push forward. Let's see if we can back the right to grow, see if we can get some of these other policy recommendations in place and carry on being opportunistic while we do it. So thank you to all of my panelists today. It was quite a packed panel, so sorry I didn't get to ask as many of you the questions that we wanted, and also I didn't get onto those last few Q&As, but if anyone wants to stay behind and answer those questions, that would be fantastic. There's a survey just to give us a bit of feedback in the chat. Do feed anything back. I'm sure we'll be sending around the presentations and obviously the recording of today. I just wanted to give a massive shout out to the team that put on today's event. Bella has been working incredibly hard behind the scenes to get together an interesting and varied panel, and obviously Ario, Fee, Maya, the rest of the team. So thank you to all of them for today. But go well, go safe into the snow, and we'll see you down at the farm hopefully. So take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.